Hi everyone, Arundhati here. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. As always, I hope you are doing well. Before we get to today's conversation, which I'm so excited to tell you about, I want to get a couple of simple announcements out of the way. Firstly, make sure you are subscribed to my email list. I have resumed sending out my monthly newsletters. I had paused for a few months because I was in 3 teacher trainings and the studios were running, so it was a little busy. So I had paused it. I have resumed sending my monthly newsletter out. The link is in the show notes. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll also have the link in my bio. So just make sure you're on that email list. I want you to think of it as an opportunity to get continuing education, free resources, perspective, mentorship, all of that on the newsletter. Okay, I even answer your questions on the newsletter. So just make sure you are signed up for that email list. The second announcement I want to make is I have been posting for the past at least 3 months now, snippets of the in-studio teacher training, clips and highlights and small tidbits on my Instagram page. So if you are on Instagram, you aren't following Arundhati Baitmangalkar, I know that's a mouthful. Okay, make sure you are following that account because I literally post snippets every single day from classes. And I do think you will find value in them. Okay. Remember, all of this is available on our YouTube channel as well, which is Aham Yoga. Okay, so those are the 3 updates I want to get out of the way. And now let's talk about today's episode. Okay, one of my favorite humans, not just yoga humans, just humans, Prasad Rangnekar is back on the show. If you are a long-time listener of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast, you know he's been here many times before and he shares his wisdom, knowledge so generously. And what I love about Prasad is he simplifies it, he contextualizes it, he makes it relatable. And the topic we are talking about today are women yogis in India through time. And this is a very complex topic, which is why you won't see much of it out there. And I approached Prasad knowing that this is an area of expertise for him, but it's very vast and we cannot contain all of it in one conversation. So I want to, before we get to the episode, put out this disclaimer that it is extremely nuanced. There are many cultural layers to it. So we can't contextualize all of it. We have tried to put some context in here, but it's a very deep and vast topic. Okay. But I do know that there isn't a resource like this out there where you can go and get some idea of what yoginis were like through time in India. So Prasad has been very generous to walk us through this. There is a lot in here, but I want you to listen all the way till the end because he tells you how to navigate with this topic. And there is a lot. We go into, is yoga, we start with, were there yoginis through time? He differentiates between yoginis and women yogis and why he says one versus the other in terminology, things like that. Okay, we start there. And then he weaves us through time from the Vedic period, go into the classical period, then we come to the modern age. There is just so much there. We talk about why women's yoga was a little more invisible. We talk about bhakti. We talk about so many things. Okay, it is very, very nuanced. I know I've said that many times over. It is complex. So take a deep breath and dive into this topic. And remember, information is not knowledge. And please listen all the way till the end because Prasad does tell you how to navigate with this. Now, Prasad has been on the show before. A lot of you are familiar with his work, but I want to add one thing here. He has, over the years, established many close-knit student communities and self-help groups globally. Okay, that's a big part of what Prasad does. And he's been engaged in many social initiatives. If you follow him on Instagram, you see him talking about this often. And he has a series of seminars called Women Yogis of India, where he teaches these and raises awareness about these women yogis in India because it is not easily available, okay, this type of information and exposure. And he raises funds through those seminars and sends them to women-focused charities. So I'm truly grateful that he came on the show today and he helped me navigate this complex topic. And I hope you learn something, you get some clarity. And as always, if you enjoy the show, remember you can always leave a rating, a review. That's how we know that this podcast is valuable. You can always tag Prasad and me on Instagram and share your takeaways from it. But that's it from my side. Enjoy this conversation about women yogis in India with Prasad Rangnekar. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. Hi, Prasad. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
Thank you, Aru. Thank you for having me again. I've missed being on your podcast.
I know, right? I'm actually wondering, it's been so long since you've been on the show. So I am really glad that you are back again, and we'll hopefully see more of you in this year. Now,
I would love that.
We're going to be talking about women practitioners, specifically yoginis, women yogis through time from India. Now, to be very honest, I've told you this already offline. It's a topic I'm not very familiar with. So I'm hoping for a little more clarity from you. But I also feel like this is a mysterious part of yoga. Like we talk about yogis and who's a yogi, and we have that aspect in popular yoga.
Yeah.
But somehow this aspect is mysterious.
Yeah.
So where should we begin? Can you clarify, was yoga a man's practice?
Okay, I have a few clarifications here, 2 or 3 clarifications. Number one, yes, you are right. This topic is mysterious because not many talk about it, and it is not discussed much. Just now in the last 10-15 years of scholarship, it has become popular to discuss about yoginis. But just before we begin, I have to say that the topic, like perhaps everything in yoga, the topic of women yogis is very nuanced, very, very layered and very sensitive. And we'll see how our conversation goes, but we will be just skimming the surface. I will be generalizing a lot of things because this can go very deep, very, very deep. Another reason is to keep it, in context. Yeah, because sometimes some things are spoken and they are, taken out of context. So the context is important. You know how it happens generally, right? One word is exaggerated and things like that. So I want to keep the context because a lot depends on the context in yoga, especially context of time, geography, subcultures, as we can see, as we can hear, perhaps we'll discuss some part of that. Yeah, that's that. So our conversation is going to be general. I will try to make it as simple and applicable as possible, but the topic is perhaps something like we have not, at least you and I have not discussed on your podcast yet.
It is complex. And I do agree it is nuanced. The little research that I was trying to do, there are so many layers to it.
Yes.
And every part of my research took me to so many cultural aspects of.
Yes.
So that's why I was like, there's one person who can have this conversation with, it's you. So you keep referring to them as women yogis of India. Is there a specific reason why you say women yogis and not yoginis? Is there a distinction here?
Yes, absolutely. See, it is not as simple as I do yoga, therefore I'm a yogi/yogini. Grammatically, yes. Grammatically, it makes perfect sense. I do yoga, therefore I'm a yogi or a yogini. But it is not as simple as that. Okay, so here I would like to add that not all women yogis are yoginis.
What do you mean by that?
Not all women yogis are yoginis, but all yoginis are women yogis. Okay. So, now our complexities start. See, it's like this. Yoginis are, there are many, many meanings of the word yogini. Okay. But in a very, very general sense, yoginis are advanced female tantra practitioners, you could say, in a very general sense. Advanced, very advanced tantra practitioners, female tantra practitioners that have been initiated by a bona fide guru in a bona fide lineage, sampradaya as they call it, through diksha, a proper process of initiation, and not just diksha, but also what can be called in English chelaship, as they call it, that is discipleship. So yoginis, you can say, are very high level of practitioners. So it's like, to give a simple correlation, just because you start drawing or painting, you can say, I do art, but you cannot say I am an artist. Right? So it's like that. It's very cultural, like you said. I mean, again, I'm saying grammatically, you can say I'm doing yoga, practicing yoga. That's why I'm a yogi or yogini. But one doesn't take that literally. So a simple sentence here: not all women yogis are yoginis. There are women yogis, and then there are women yogis who are designated as yoginis. I mean, I will talk about who the yoginis are, but perhaps it is a little too early to get into complexity of things in the first 3-4 minutes. But here I want to say that when we ask a question, did women in ancient India do yoga? Right? That's a general question asked. Our questioning or reflection should start by defining the term yoga. What do you mean by it? This is very important. So what yoga are we talking about here? Do we intend to ask, did women yogis of the past do asana? Because that's what we correlate to. Well, there are very, very few accounts of women doing asanas, if not negligible accounts. But did women practice yoga? Did women do yoga in ancient India? Yes. So our question has a sub-question. If you say, was yoga a practice for men? Then I would first want to clarify what is yoga that you are asking me about. So in today's conversation, the yoga that I'm going to speak about or we are going to discuss is not asana. It's a complete process of self-transmutation that takes a person to self-realization. So my definition of yoga for our conversation today is self-transformation for self-realization. Should we stick to this definition?
Yes. I'm glad you clarified that, because I think in popular yoga, Western yoga, modern yoga, whatever you're calling it, everybody equates yoga as asana, right?
Correct.
And you had once used the term, I think in one of our first conversations, what was it? The asanization of yoga or something like that. And we think the part is the whole. That's what you had said once.
Correct. Absolutely.
So it makes full sense. I'm glad you clarify that, because a lot of people look at it as, we have no record of women going and doing asana, and hence they didn't do yoga. So is it a good time now to explore the role of a woman in society, like back in the day, the culture, the societal divide, right? We had our roles in society. They were very clear.
Yeah.
How much of an impact does that have on this conversation?
Huge. Our whole conversation is going to be about this role of women in society and their impact, and how they rebelled, how they challenged the norms, and how they realized themselves, and how they inspired generations to come. But when you said back in the day, I was smiling here because back as in how back, but we will counter. See, this is what yoga is. Like you say, back in the day,
Yes,
then
how
you
far?
have,
Mm-hmm.
pre-Vedic, post-Vedic, medieval, modern, pre-modern. I mean, from a scholarly point of view, there are so many, if we can divide the whole yogic history in, 500-year periods and kind of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we will make it simple. So
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
Aru, yes, there's a huge impact of what we are discussing in yoga and the culture, because yoga is deeply embedded in cultural ecosystem of India.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yoga is essential component of all the religions coming out of India.
Mm-hmm.
There is yoga in Buddhism, there is yoga in Jainism, and today I am going to talk about yoginis, or women yoga practitioners in Buddhism and Jainism too.
Mm-hmm.
So yoga, being deeply cultural, is colored by cultural norms.
Mm-hmm.
Your culture involves traditions, beliefs, systems, something shared that gives value to people. So we cannot disassociate yoga from the Indic culture.
Understood. Okay.
This is very, very important. It's like Indian food is known for spice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because we put for spice in Indian food. So the cultural component is the spice. So, like, just sticking to what you asked, how about the impact? Yes, it's a huge impact across the ages. Now, the importance of women in society has changed.
Correct.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
across last 2,500, 3,000 period, 3,000 years or so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we need to look at that. So if you want, I can start from the scratch, start from the Vedic period.
Uh-huh. No, I think we can start from the Vedic period, but I have one quick question there before we get to the Vedic period.
Yeah.
And feel free to answer it later if it's not relevant right now.
Yeah.
So speaking of the cultural context, right? I'm thinking of religions in India, and you will see a lot of goddesses being worshipped, right? You see all these figurines in these temples and so many goddesses, and each of them represent certain aspects, right?
Yeah.
So is there a link between the feminine divinity aspect and the goddesses that we see in India with the women yogis? Or is it not related?
No, it is related. It is very strongly related. It's because there's so many
I know it's a complex
points in my head, because it's strongly related. But like, for example, Durga, Kali have been used by many women in the medieval period or even early period to explicitly challenge societal norms, the gender hierarchy, gender disparity. So feminine divinity or goddesses is not just a representation of something like a creative force. Since we are talking about society and since we are talking about culture, they have been. I mean, Durga is perhaps one of the first anti-patriarchal symbolism. Yeah. So, she inspired a lot of women, especially women who followed the tantras, to rise above institutionalized sexism, oppression by the patriarchy. Kali is an extreme form of rebellion. So yes, the goddesses are not just a symbolism of some principle or some tattva. Yeah, the goddesses have and still inspire people, men, women, children, everyone. So yeah, is that what you were asking?
Yes, it was.
I mean, there are so many deities that way, like there are 8 types of Lakshmis. And there are many types of Saraswatis. Now, by the way, today we are in a day of Saraswati, right? Vasant Panchami. So we are doing this, we are recording this on the day when Saraswati is worshipped. So right day for our conversation.
No, I asked because, so many countries and cultures in the world,
Mm-hmm.
women have gotten their freedom, their right to expression, all of their some of those things now in the recent past 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in India, we've always celebrated the feminine from
Yes.
like from so long back. Okay.
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask about that. You were talking, before I interrupted you were talking about the Vedic period.
Yeah. In India, we have celebrated the feminine, but let's be honest, that celebration may not always percolate to the deepest parts of society.
Correct. I was going to bring that up later in the conversation when we came to like modern day.
Yes.
But
yes.
I am 100% in alignment when you say that.
There is patriarchal discrimination like any culture, So patriarchal discrimination has had its share of strong and weak grips across India's geography, culture, and periods in history. So but starting from the Vedic period, that was the scholars say that was a time when women were at par with men. The husband wife, like for yajna, for the fire rituals, the women had to be there. Like the word that is used in Rig Veda is dampat, or ardha angani. They say ardhangini, we say, in the local languages, means half body of a man is a woman. That way. So they are half of each other's. Well, they say the marriage of the girls took place when they were 16, 18, which is, fairly higher age as opposed to the later period. Girls also went through their Upanayanam ceremony like the boys. Yajna would not be done without women. They had a choice of choosing their husband. Swayamvara. Swayamvar, for the listeners, Swayamvar is like a ceremony in which the woman chooses her match, her husband. Swayam means self and Vara means husband or a partner. So self choosing the partner. We see not many as later ages, but we see some goddesses in the Rigvedic period. And when we say Rigveda, we are talking about 1500 BC and things like that. Now, from the context of our topics, what is important is the Vedas, or at least the Rig Veda, talks about a special kind of women called Brahmavadinis. Brahmavadini. They were like ascetic women who were dedicated to the realization of Brahman. Brahman is absolute consciousness. So you could say these were women who were highly dedicated to their spiritual seeking and had also realized themselves through their sadhana. So the Rig Vedas mention, yoginis like Lopamudra, Maitreyi, Gargi, Ghosha, Vishwara. There are names, and not just names, there are verses written by these Brahmavadinis. They would debate. There's a Sulabha Maitreyi's debate. In fact, this woman ascetic Lopamudra was a wife of Agastya Rishi. And there's a famous dialogue of Gargi, who has debated with Yajnaval.
Oh, yes.
So one of the most famous rishis of the Veda. So for me, what is interesting is, at least in this Vedic time period, the realization of self was not completely or solely the prerogative of a man. This is very interesting because, and not just of a man, but also not only of a particular ashrama. Ashrama means, here we are talking about stage of life. Like Gargi, the scholar Gargi, she is said to have achieved self-realization in her brahmacharya, in her studentship period. Then Chudala, there was another one who achieved in a grihastha as a wife. Maitreyi achieved her self-realization in Vanaprasthashram. Sulabha Yogini was a sannyasi. So we can see different women who have realized themselves in different aspects of their life, and we see they are celebrated. And not just in the Hindu fold, even in Jainism, there is one of the Tirthankars is Malli. Okay, so women were doing their things in this time period. Okay, but then gradually, of what I have read and of what scholars have read, gradually they say we find a decline in status of women.
Correct.
And majorly through the end of BC and the beginning of Common Era, we see even through saint literatures of women who struggled through this period, and there's a lot of it. We see that, like things like sun becoming the lamp of the Vansh or heredity, and daughter considered as dead. Or chastity of a woman becomes
questionable,
like an anxiety. There's a word called Varna Sankar, means basically pollution of the future generation. So the woman's chastity became a very important part of the society. But again, like I mentioned before we began, there's a lot of different opinions based on the law books called as Dharma Shastras. So we cannot generalize it, but again, I'm just giving you like a drift of things. And then, of course, then colonialism, there was a lot of invasion from the East, foreign invasions. Then position of women went down even further. In the medieval ages, the marriageable age of the girls was,
even lower,
even reduced.
Yeah.
So a lot of such, we see these things happening in society. And again, I'm not just saying it out of my head. There's enough evidence, even in the Puranas like Agni Purana and some law books, Dharma Shastra books, or testimonies of authors who have written commentaries on widow remarriages and should widows marry and things like that. So really, it is deeply ingrained in the society. In fact, one common term, if you read some scriptures, one common term that you hear from the context of women is Kamini and Kanchan. So the male seekers or male practitioners, especially the ascetic practitioners, are always told to beware of Kamini and Kanchan. Means women and gold. Women and gold, are ruins of man and things like that. And so we see, but then again, we are talking about a period of 2000 years. This is I'm just giving a general view.
Even as you were speaking, there are so many nuances, right? So many.
Yeah.
Why, for example, why that marriageable age came down? There are specific reasons for that. And so I'm glad you are bringing, I don't want to go into all of that because
that will be a completely different discussion.
Correct. That's why I'm not going there.
It's
not our focus, right? But yeah, I'm just putting it there because there will always be some people who will jump to conclusions.
Yes.
Without enough context.
That's why I'm saying that, this is a very general statement that I'm making. There are evidences too. Like, for example, there is a scripture from Gujarat from the 12th century during the reign of one called Kumarapala. And there are inscriptions about rights of the widow, so on one end we are talking about widows' rights, on the other end there are inscriptions about the widows' rights, so again, like I said, it really depends on the geography, subcultures.
So true.
Like some cultures in India are matriarchal. Even today they are matriarchal.
Correct.
So it's not that there's no patriarchy there, but then, the goddess worship and matriarchy, even during the marriage ceremony, we see that the matriarchal system is still prevalent. There are so many communities in the Himalayan tribes, in the north of Himalayas, they are purely matriarchal. So we, again, whatever we are speaking should be interpreted in context and not generalized, though we are just giving a little overall view of this.
It is very nuanced.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that we pause and keep calling that out, because the one thing I think a lot of yoga practitioners do, at least in the West, is they generalize. They assume one thing is applicable to all of India, but it's not. It's very nuanced. So I'm glad we circle back to that. So the way I understand it, right? The women practitioners, these women yogis, they were very private about their sadhana. And I feel like the men yogis, they were perhaps a little more, for lack of a more refined way of saying this, they were a little more visible. They were spreading it a little more, but the women did this more for their own inner sadhana, and it was not like, okay, now I know this, come let me teach all of you. And I don't know if that's the right way of thinking about it, but I also feel like somehow women just were more private about a lot of this compared to some of the men yogis, sages across time.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that's why, Aru, when I do my Women Yogis of India seminars around the world, I call them silent saints of India. Because we have heard a lot about, male philosophers, male yogis, male saints, male sadhus.
Correct.
But I personally feel the women saints have not gotten their due. Even in Indian society, and West is another thing. I mean, people hardly know about them. And that's why I do my little work about these women yogis, because men were the philosophers, men were the intellectuals.
They were the thinkers, yeah.
Yeah, but honestly, if you see who passed down the spiritual values through the generations, it were the women. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I studied Bhagavad Gita and a little bit philosophy as a child from my mother, from the stories and everything. So, I mean, I think most of us, that's why, we say, Matru Devo Bhava, mother is the God. And we also say, Tvameva Mata, Chapita, Tvameva. So, mother is worshipped because they did pass on values, spiritual values through stories. And I mean, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's mother told him the stories of bravery. So, yes, you're absolutely right that they were quiet, but they were quiet because of many reasons. Not because, not quiet because they did not have the confidence. Where they had to, they rose. But again, I have to mention here that the role, the women were secondary, or perhaps they were more tied down to their role as a wife and a mother. And whoever could rise above that role, those women became, Rani Lakshmi Bai, or
correct.
Other women, not just yogi women, but also freedom fighters, or stopping the colonizers, through their armies or whatever. So women have contributed a lot to the social fabric, and there's a lot of literature that women have written that needs to come out. It's very local. If we have time, we'll go through different women yogis and how they moved through their times. There are so many. The state from where you come from, there's, Akka Mahadevi.
Yes.
So these are not ordinary women. And these are not just poetesses, okay? These women have realized themselves through their sadhana, through their intense devotion. And if you ask me, what was the method that they used? I would say majorly the method that they used was the power of their faith.
Okay.
Their bhakti was their power. And their poetry, their composition was their weapon, was their placard to implicitly or explicitly challenge the gender norms, the constraints, the biases. You know, the women, that's why women are closely associated with something called as the Bhakti movement that started in India in 6th century. You know, now I know I'm going into specifics, but there are lots of Bhakti saints who are women because they were, majority of women were not allowed to do rituals and things like that, like yajnas and also. But nobody could stop them from worshipping. Nobody could stop them from loving, like Meera.
Correct.
Yeah, went crazy in love because that was the bhakti cannot be stopped. You can stop someone from chanting mantras. No, these are Vedic mantras. Women should not chant it. Even today, such norms exist. But how can you stop a Meera's heart from overflowing for Krishna? Or Akka Mahadevi breaking spontaneously into a composition for her beloved God? Or Janabai from Maharashtra to write about her Krishna? You see, so there's a huge impact of, these women have all my admiration for how they rose despite being cornered into very tight gender roles of taking care of the kitchen and creating children. This is incredible. This fascinates me to no end.
Bravery is not the right word. It's there's so much of softness and strength.
Yes, absolutely.
That comes about in all of this. So you spoke about the Vedic period, right?
Yeah.
And I know I want to call out for the listeners. We're doing a very skimming the surface version of this here because there are, like you said, that you can go into such detail here, but it's so vast.
Yes.
So where do we go from the Vedic period?
From the Vedic period, we can go through the timeline as it comes to me, gradually.
I know your timeline because I know your timeline of how you move through it. I'm just...
Yeah, like now we are done with Vedic period. So, so we move gradually to the end of the BC period and gradually come to the CE, the Common Era. And what I want to say is, if we broadly look at the women yogis, okay, now we are not discussing yogini. I'll come back to that. I'll circle back to that. Please remind me.
Okay.
Because I have some things to say about the yoginis, and that is fascinating. But these women can be divided into two. One type of women who were rebel yogis, and the other women who stayed in their gender-specified role, not necessarily happily, but realized themselves. So from the rebel women side, we have Mirabai, Akka Mahadevi, or Lalla from Kashmir. We have Muktabai from Maharashtra. We have Andal from South India. We have Avvaiyar. We have Karaikal Ammaiyar. These are rebel women, who, and how do we know? Because they have written stuff. Okay, at least their disciples or whoever has written their ideas. And we always see a tension in their poems and their writings between their hunger for spiritual realization and the gender specified roles. We can always see this tension between them, within them. And they are very, they are not spiritual bypassers. They explicitly write about it. And this is, for me, this is beautiful. That's why I tell people that if you really want to know what the saints and mystics, both men and women, have gone through in their lives, read saint literature. Philosophy is one thing. But if you want to read about the real human experience of what the saints have gone through, you will never question the difficulties in your sadhana. Never. So literature of all these women is very strong. On the other end, we have what could be called, in quotes, chaste women. So like Basavanna's wife from your state,
Yeah.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's wife was Bahina Bai in Maharashtra around 17th century. One of my favorite saints, Gangasati from Gujarat. So many rebel women yogis, they gave up their homes. So they gave up their homes. They walked out of their homes, out of marriages because of whatever, either because of their desperate bhakti or because of abuse from husbands or in-laws.
Fair.
So, like one of the earliest women saints is Avvaya. She was a woman saint from South India, and she is, well, don't remember exactly how many, but I think 10 or 12 books on many topics. She talks about ethics on one end, on spirituality on other end. Through her writing, we can see that there is rigid social division, and she blatantly ridicules unworthy, incompetent men and compares them to God. Avvai, she's called as Avvai. Okay, Avvaiyar, she's called as Avvai. She asks, how could I serve the Lord and husband at the same time? This is her push and pull. She asks Ganesha this, and immediately Ganesha transforms her into an old woman. It is, and this is how she is released from her requirements of marriage and all that. So this is something we find in many women, that shedding of clothes, shedding of shame, comes again and again in their writings. Like another woman saint, Karaikal Ammayya. Similar story. Husband abandoned her due to her, now some accounts due to her, miracles. Because she was born a spiritually highly realized person. So she straight away submits to Shiva, and Shiva transforms her into this, like, now some people say, demoness. But if you visit South Indian temples, you will see her. The iconography in which she is represented is a very thin. You can see her rib cage, kind of like a witch, naked witch kind of body. She also rejects her feminine body and says it's useless, because you have to understand their mentality. And that's how they were perhaps looked at, objectified. Right? So this is their rebellion that I'm talking about. Explicitly or implicitly, through their life, through their poetry, they have rebelled. Andal, in 8th century, she ultimately married Krishna. She writes how to gain Krishna as a husband. She writes this for her friends, her girlfriend. And she's always compared to a gopi. She's called as one of the gopis. And then we have Akka Mahadevi, who was also unhappy in her marriage. She's an amazing rebel. I was there in her temple talking to some of they have Akka Mahadevi comes from a certain sect of people. And I was talking to the priests of the temple, and they were telling me such amazing stories about, for them it is natural, but for me, from my perspective, her life is rebellion. So she also talks about her dissatisfaction as a wife, and there's always a tension between the worldly and the spiritual life, and this is why we need to read about it.
Correct.
And she also, straight away surrenders to Shiva, throws away her clothes, and then she's like, I'm not ashamed of anything now. Finally, I'm released from people's view of me as just a body, or objectified perception of me, and then she's one of the three main people, of saints of Veerashaiva sect. So she has written some amazing vachanas in Kannada. Yeah, I mean, there's Muktabai in Maharashtra, 13th century. She was the sister of Jnanadev. Hatha Yogis, huh? Now, those people who think Hatha Yoga was not practiced, Muktabai is the original Hatha Yogi, right? And very young girl, but what wisdom! She initiated men into the path of Hatha Yoga.
Wow.
She has surpassed many sages from that time. And such a young girl, at 12 or 13, she would guide people. And the kind of poetry she has written is accounted in her name is just incredible. What mystical poetry. Like there is one poem of her which says, in Marathi, it says, Mungi udali akashi tine gidle suryashi. That means Mungi is an ant. Ant flew to the sky and swallowed the sun. You see, now for us, it's like parables. You have to go into that state of mind and decipher what she has written. This is, in Marathi, it's called Kutache Abhang, means riddle kind of songs or poetry. She has written about Kundalini rising. She's written about chakras. So we are really talking about, tantric. Muktabai can be called as a yogini because she comes from the tantric background because of her guru, who was Jnanadev, who was Natha Yogi, Hatha Yogi, basically. On the softer side, we have Janabai. Around the same time, now Janabai was a servant of Namdev, and she has written over 200 OVs or small poetries. For her Krishna, her devotion, she's one of my favorite saints, and her devotion to Krishna is just I don't know what to say. Sometimes I cry when I'm reading her poetry. Now she also, look at her realizations. In one of her poetry, she says, I have eaten God and I drink God. So, you can sense their realizations.
Their absorption.
Yes.
Complete absorption.
What state of mind they came in from. But they were still like Janabai, who was a maid servant of a male saint. Now, many people, and I would also say that Namadev, whose maid Janabai was, he was humble enough to collect her poetry and compile them or help compile them. So thanks to him, her poetry was saved, because you have to understand, she was a servant. She was in the kitchen and cleaning and things. She would not ask some person to, hey, some poetry is coming to me. Just write it down. Such things didn't happen. But we see a very beautiful side, and her poetry about Vithala, right, Krishna, are so beautiful. She, on one end, she calls Vithala her girlfriend. She imagines Vithala as her girlfriend. And she says, like, in one of her poetries, Janabai also kind of censures Vithala. He says, what is this? What kind of a god you are? You can't even carry the pot of water properly from the well. Look, you spilled all the water on your clothes. So for me, this is beauty, that God, these women who were not rebels, who stayed in their gender-specified roles, they literally brought God into their circumstances and realized themselves. They brought God into their kitchen. They brought God into their childbirth. They brought God into their garden. So for me, that kind of bhakti is very, very inspiring, very, very strong. Then in the north, in Kashmir, we have Lal Ded, Lalla, and she was also treated in a harsh way by her mother-in-law. And she has also written what is called as Vak, like Vakya we say, right? Vak. Amazing poetries, amazing realizations, and she was singing, dancing, again, nude, okay? Dropping clothes and jumping into shame, non-shame was their way to come out of prying eyes of men, maybe, and just to get out of this societal tight boundaries of sophisticated, this is how a woman should be kind of.
Correct.
So I see this as a spectrum. Rebel women yogis, and then women yogis who were
in society,
like you can say domestic women yogis. Now there are domestic women yogis too, like wives of many scholars and saints.
Correct.
Like
Parvati.
There was sorry?
I said Parvati, but my timeline will be off on that one.
Yeah, Parvati, yes. And I'll come to Parvati, Aru. So there was Vasukiyar, wife of Tiruvalluvar. Tiruvalluvar was one of the saints from Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
And if you go to Kanyakumari, there's a huge statue of Tiruvalluvar there. Okay. Now they say that Tiruvalluvar wanted to test her. So he gave her a grain of sand and asked her to turn it into a grain of rice. And she did it.
Oh, I've heard the story. Yeah.
So it's like, now these stories tell us, or just are indicative of their mystical powers too. Right? So they are, again, I'm saying they are not, because they have written poetry, doesn't mean they were just poetesses imagining something. They were realized, or at least highly spiritually advanced souls. There was Neelamma, the second wife of Basavanna, and there's Mahadevi Amma, who was also Veerashaiva. There's Bahina Bai from Maharashtra, who never stripped her clothes and did not, get out of her gender roles, did nothing dramatic, but she wrote her own biography. She wrote over 450 abhangas of poetries, and she talks about mortality, about sadhana, importance of guru, and like I said, my favorite, Ganga Sati from 17th century Gujarat. And Ganga Sati gives the dialogue between Ganga Sati and her daughter-in-law called Panbai is just brilliant. So Ganga Sati, it's like literally passing down the knowledge to her daughter-in-law. So beautiful, in such beautiful poetries. So yeah, the spectrum is very broad, and there's lot of inspiration. Lot of inspiration. Even in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, that is the nowadays known as Hare Krishna, there was a Jannava Ishwari in 10th century, who was wife of Chaitanya's associate, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associate, Nityananda. So there are, then just comes to my mind, Mata Rupa Bhavani from Srinagar. She was a daughter of Kali devotee. Now, this Mata Rupa Bhavani, she was also a yogini. She would apparently escape at midnight and do her sadhana in the mountains for Shiva. As a girl, as a young girl. But again, mistreated by her husband and in-law, so she leaves the home. And she has also, just like Muktabai, Rupa Bhavani has also written about Kundalini rise. And so she can also be, we can categorize her in yogini. So yeah, I mean, I can go on, Aru, so much. I just want to, I'm not just dropping names. I just want to say there is a lot of inspiration. And if you ask a question, did women do yoga? This is the answer. And we are just skimming the surface.
No, I'm glad you are giving us, just in this part of India, I think largely, and this is my naive understanding of it, because a lot of this is in poetry and in languages, at least it's not in English.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to find. So we just assume that it didn't exist.
Correct.
So I'm glad you are contextualizing it for us. You asked me to remind you to circle back to yogini. You said you had something to say.
Now yoginis. Okay. Now women saints. Okay. We have done a glazed over women saints. Now we come to
Yes,
yogis.
and I know there are many more that we are not going to get into.
Yeah, but let's now focus on yoginis. A little, again, glazing over yoginis. Now, yoginis, like I said, number one, yoginis are advanced practitioners, female tantra practitioners. Even today, they exist. Initiated by a bona fide guru in a bona fide lineage after a satisfactory discipleship. I'm purposely qualifying all these things. No, they were not what you call them. They don't call themselves yogini and just be self-proclaimed. Yes, correct. Now, yoginis exist in Hinduism and Buddhism.
Jainism.
Both. Yeah, like at least in Hinduism and Buddhism, because like I said, it's a cultural thing. Like in Buddhism or Buddhist Tantra in 8th century, there was she's one of my favorite yoginis. Her name is Sahaja Yogini Chinta. Okay. And yeah, she's Tantra Yogi. Okay. I will leave it at that. And then there are other yoginis who are also sometimes called bhikshunis, like bhikshu, no? Bhikshunis, like Lakshmikara, Dombi Yogini, Shabari, Gangadhara. There are many, okay? And they were in the Buddhist Tantra practices. In the Hindu Tantra, so in the Natha Yogi Sampradaya, or you can say the founding lineage of Hatha Yogi. I have written a few times about it. Like you said, I think you mentioned in your email or something, they have Navanathas. There are 9 Nathas or 9 main saints of this lineage called Natha lineage. Now, in some parts of India, the Parvati, she is known as Udayana, because Shiva gave Parvati the first discourse on Hatha Yoga or yoga of Kundalini Tantra Yoga. So she's considered Udayanath as one of the first Natha yogis, But if we look at like the non-goddess way, there is Vimala Mai. Now, she's one of the founders of one of the subsects of this sampradaya. She has written a scripture called Gorakshopanishad. And there are many yoginis. Now, these are yoginis because they have worked in a tantric lineage on their kundalini, so they qualify as yoginis. Okay, yoginis like Kankhala, Mekhala, Jwalamai, there are many. So they worked with kundalini, they did chakra bheda or broke their chakras, they worked with their prana. So yes, women, and this is just one sampradaya I'm talking about. This is just one lineage that I'm talking about. So things existed. Now from you could say, in quotes, okay, now I'm in quotes, mythological, spiritual, metaphysical point of view, yoginis are also understood to be fierce, scary sorceresses, shape-shifting sorceresses, okay? And they manifest, otherwise they live in the dream world, again in quotes, the dream world. And when invoked, there are ways of invoking these yoginis, and when invoked properly, and if your time is right, they guide the spiritual aspirant, or even they chastise the disciple. So these are you don't just invoke a yogini like this just because. Okay, that's why Tantra is a hidden science. It's called Gushya Vidya, Guda Vidya, So you don't just get a mantra from somebody and invoke a yogini. You don't do that. In a very local way, yogini is also somebody like a local goddess, village goddess. If you go to many villages in India, the villages have a small goddess temple outside the village. So they are also sometimes called yoginis. Now, yoginis are also rulers, or what you can call it, goddesses or deities, of every chakra. Basically, in Tantra, every chakra has a ruling yogini. So sometimes some lineages talk about 6 yoginis, and sometimes they talk about 7 yoginis. So Dakini, Rakini, Lakini, Kakini, Shakini, Hakini. These are yoginis that guard every chakra. There are legit rituals, there are legit mantras, there are legit invocations, there are sadhanas to invoke these yoginis. So understand, we are talking about a very, very different kind of esoteric knowledge here. Now, sometimes in some books, you also find that, or in some lineage teachings, you also find that yoginis guide every humor of the body, the sapta dhatu of Ayurveda, right? So there is, just like there are yoginis who guide every chakra, there are yoginis who guide every dhatu. And then there are subtle practices. And after you please one yogini, or after you can say, invoke one yogini and literally please her, that's what they say in the tantras, then you rise up, literally like video games, you rise in the subtler, going from the grossest dhatu to the subtlest dhatu. And that's how you move between psychosomatic domains of human consciousness. So we are really, really talking about a different kind of wisdom here. Then there are, we are still discussing what yoginis are. I know it's complex. I'm perhaps just comes as some sound, but it is complex. So that's why I'm just. And then there are ashtamatrikas, or 8 goddesses, mother goddesses as they are called. And in fact, in the Sri Vidya lineage, they say that there are 640 million yoginis that serve goddess Lalita.
Wow. Okay.
Maha Chatush Koti Yogini Gana Sevita is what. So it's like 600, because 8, there are 8 matrikas, 8 goddesses, main goddesses, and each 8 goddess has their 8, what you call, associates. And then, so 8 into 8, 64, and each of them has 10 million more energies, or secondary energies, or companions. So 640.
Wow.
Okay. So in fact, it's one of the names of Lalita Devi in the Lalita Sahasranam. So in the Kali Tantra lineage, there are 64 yoginis, 64 main yoginis. Each yogini represents a kala. It's called yogini kala, or kala means like a art or science. So every yogini you please, you kind of literally download that kala. You become master or skillful at that craft. So it's really, really, really nuanced, as I said, moving from esoteric, metaphysical realm to an actual physical, empirical human realm. Yoginis are a wide expanse term, depending on the context of the lineage, depending on what you're looking at. Yeah, that's it.
I am just in awe of how this just flows out of you, and the clarity that you're bringing. And it is, the more you tell us, all I can think of is this, it's so vast, and there is so much in here. And I want to be mindful of time. I know it is very late where in you always stay up and do these episodes.
That's okay.
So if I could jump over and fast forward into modern day, if I may, okay, what about the modern day practitioner? And I don't want to say man or woman or gender specific, but what about modern day practitioners? Anything that we should keep in mind when it comes to this conversation?
Yes. Number one, you suddenly now don't start researching about yoginis and this and that.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please, Okay. You don't have to know everything about every yogini, even if you
Correct.
are passionate and you feel this is your topic and things like that. I mean, I'm no one to say don't do it, but the knowledge is should be accessed ideally from a teacher.
Correct.
Again, a teacher from a lineage who will give you a specific knowledge. Unless you are doing a PhD in yogini or something like that, this kind of broad based knowledge is not required. Even what I have told you here is very, very superficial, and I'm admitting to the fact that it is very, very general. Okay. There are hundreds of scriptures. There are couple of dozens of lineages. There are different. Just look at the 7, 8 definitions of yoginis that I gave. It's not like I didn't say yogini means this and then I ended. No, yoginis, every chakra has a yogini, and then yoginis are also about the dhatu, and yoginis are also advanced female practitioners, and yoginis are also village tribal goddesses. So it is complex. Everybody doesn't have to know everything in yoga.
Correct. I strongly agree with you.
Please, how much ever it impresses you, and if you really want to take a jump, then find a teacher who can guide you accordingly, not any teacher. Okay, so because I know many people will be interested in this topic, you have such a sincere and mature audience, Aru. So a lot of people will immediately try to research. Please, I'm not saying don't, but don't get overwhelmed, or sometimes you feel, oh, there's so much knowledge, how will I ever know?
You don't need to know.
That kind of not good enough complex, imposter syndrome can also come. This is just knowledge. What is important is your sadhana.
Correct.
Okay, so this is information, I would say. It is interesting information, but I don't know if it is really applicable. Applicable in the sense like present in our day-to-day life. These are just informations that just because there is a Dakini residing in Muladhara will not help you with paying your bills. Sorry, but
so true. No, it's true.
This is why this knowledge was Gudha Vidya. This is why this is secretive knowledge, and it was the Guru's responsibility to filter, keep filtering the student and raise the student to that level where this knowledge could just be transmuted without the need of sound and things like that. Okay, so don't get overwhelmed. Number one, in a very simple way, don't get overwhelmed. Yes, of course, you will get fascinated. You will be interested. I would say try to research, if you have to, lives of these women saints. That will help you to just feel okay with your troubles and whatever you are going through. Right? Because sometimes it's nice that, oh, this 10th century woman yogi also went through these issues like me. Nice. So you feel validated that I'm not the, in
Only
quotes,
one.
crazy one. This is a common occurrence in many women yogis. So please keep your sadhana simple and your swadhyaya sincere. Don't get overwhelmed by whatever we have spoken. Get fascinated. Do your little research, but you don't immediately have to look at this topic as another topic to distract yourself from your core sadhana. Sorry to be very, very frank, but don't look at gathering knowledge as a substitute for deepening your realization.
I think that is solid advice.
I don't know if I answered your question, Haru.
No, it was actually great.
Something.
No, the question was just, what do we keep in mind today, right? Like,
yeah, for modern yogis, man or woman, this is it.
This is it. No, it is. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we are living in times of overwhelm. Yeah, I mean, on a daily basis, I talk to yoga seekers and teachers who are completely overwhelmed. There's so much out there.
And it's not about gathering information. Yeah.
Correct. No, It's not.
Mm-hmm.
Information is not realization.
Correct.
Packing on information is not realization. Mm-hmm. And this is why these women yogis, the list I gave you, Janabai, Muktabai, Lal Ded, or what did these women do? These women just went deep in their faith. They just grounded themselves in their devotion. They were not all of them were like scholars and rattling Sanskrit mantras and debating like their scholarly husbands or the scholarly acharyas of their time.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many stories of these heavy-headed scholar acharyas who surrendered to these so-called illiterate or so-called less literate women yogis. They're like, how does she do it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are stories that enough of philosophy. Now I just want to be like her, drown myself in devotion, in simplicity of life.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's one line in Bhagavad Purana, and it says that the love of God, even the God, Krishna loves the devotee so much, that the Krishna follows the devotee. Mm. So take your sadhana to such a level that the realization sprouts within you. Yes, information, reading, study has its own importance, but not by sacrificing the depth of our sadhana. This is the only thing I will say to anybody and everybody who is in a modern understanding of yoga, because it's too much out there.
Mm-hmm. It is true.
We need to ground ourselves in just a small, sincere focus in our own sadhana. And then let the sadhana decide which way you should go, which teacher you should approach, and what kind of knowledge you should gain. Mm-hmm. If tomorrow, nobody knows. If Tantra, the kind of Tantra that we spoke about today, the Guhya Tantra, the secretive Tantra, is in your karma, then let your sadhana take you there. So just keep it simple.
You don't have to force it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Keep it simple, yes. And I was thinking less is more. I strongly believe in yoga, less is more.
Absolutely.
Like there are topics that I know I will not touch because I'm not ready for them. And at this point in my life, they're irrelevant to me.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you are finishing with that. I know for a fact that there is so much more that you have to offer for this topic. But do you think this is a good spot to wrap this up?
Yes. Enough. Because otherwise otherwise this can continue.
Yes, I know.
I will also go on. You will also go on.
Yeah.
And this podcast will become like a 5-hour podcast.
Yeah,
so this is enough.
Mm-hmm.
This is, like we said, this is like just not even summary. Okay. Summary is done later. This is just like little small 10-second trailer of, and there's more. I'm not saying I've given the whole view.
I know. Yeah.
I'm also not such an adept at this topic or whatever, so I've just, for whatever my teachers have taught me and my own little research, it's just a little sprinkling of information here and there. Okay, so please don't get overwhelmed. As Aru said, less is more, and our sadhana itself will tell us that less is more. That's the beauty of sadhana.
So true.
Gradually things start dropping off, and you come down to that one or two main modalities, and that's enough. That's it. That is the maturity of a yogi or a yoga seeker or a sadhak, and not how much information they carry in their brain cells.
It is true. It is so true. Just that ending there to me is very powerful, where how much information do you carry in your brain cells? That's not really your yoga sadhana.
Yeah, it has some practical value, but it not really. From spiritual point of view, ultimately you have to come out of information to be seated in realization. Information is a staircase that leads you to realization. Information is not realization. This is a very, very important note over here. The Vidya has gradations.
Yes.
Knowledge has gradations. There's paravidya, there's aparavidya, as Upanishads talk about it. So yes, information is important, but just don't carry so much and just collect, because we live in times, we
You have to
live in
practice
information,
over
technology.
them.
Yeah.
It's when I'd like to remind the listeners to practice their aparigraha in this aspect too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, having you here is always a joy. I learn so much from you. I look forward to having you and listening to these conversations. Thank you so much for your generosity when it comes to just coming and sharing repeatedly.
Thank you so much.
As always, I will link to everything that you do, your Instagram, your courses, your website, so all the listeners can connect with you directly.
Thank you so much.
And keep learning. Thank you so much, Prasad.
Thank you.
As always, thank you so much for listening. I will be back here next week with another episode and another guest. Until then, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.